I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor the Podcast. On this episode of Dirt Sailor the Podcast, we will be discussing Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, and the conflicts that we are seeing in those countries. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy back twice Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this Thursday?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Little tired. Processed some olives. Pitting olives is a lot of work.
Did you get Olive Oil's permission to process olives?
Olives of my own, into my own. I did. And then I also ate some spinach so I can process faster.
Awesome.
Because I'm Popeye the Sailor Man.
I ate spinach this morning too. Eat it every day with breakfast.
Strong to the finish because you eat your spinach.
Yes. I'm Marky the Sailor Man. Well, well, well. What crazy times we're in. Still. Or again.
Very crazy. And I'm sure there are better descriptors than very crazy, but at this point, very crazy is what we are seeing. Israel has been attacked. Hamas came in by land, air, and sea. They are murdering civilians. They have taken hostages. Apparently, at this point, it's being reported that children are being kept in cages. Women, the elderly, are being murdered. And Hamas has stated if Israel attacks unannounced, they will execute hostages.
One for one. One missile into a building in Gaza, one executed hostage.
And we are also seeing people around the world rallying and celebrating Hamas.
Well, of course, that's what happens when things around the world are left unchecked and people are, I don't know if ill-educated or undereducated is the proper terminology to use. Since I'm not a geopolitical expert, it's interesting that I watched over probably 80 videos today on YouTube, all as they relate to Israel and Palestine and the Palestinians, the Gaza Strip, Syria, Egypt, everybody that surrounds Israel. What a mess this whole thing is. I wish I had more knowledge in how long the conflict portion of this really goes back. Because if you take the biblical side out of this thing, the Hamas terrorist organization are a bunch of nuts. Cut and dried. You don't pull children out of houses. You don't pull grandmothers, grandkids out of houses. Kill them, behead them. That's no better than that ISIS organization that the U.S. and other superpowers took out a few years ago. And I don't think anybody knows how to fix this either, because this is going to go on for a long time. This is the worst attack on Israel, probably since the Holocaust, as a lot of people are saying.
Yes, and it's the last time that Israel declared war was 50 years ago. 1973. 50 years ago, they declared war.
Yes, 50 years and one day.
And as you noted, they're saying it's the worst attack since the Holocaust on the Jewish people. They have... So something that I'm seeing in this celebration of Hamas, which is what it is. Palestine didn't rise up and do this. Hamas, the terrorist organization, did this. As such, if you are celebrating what is going on, you are celebrating terrorists. You're not celebrating Palestine having a victory. But let's just say Hamas does represent Palestine, and they are one and the same. So they are led by a U.S. designated terrorist organization, and they are currently acting as such, as terrorists, kidnapping people, murdering people, women, children, elderly, sending rockets over and over again. And mind you, this isn't the first time since 1973 that they've shot rockets into Israel. This is just one of the biggest attacks in quite some time. The other ones, Israel just basically called skirmishes. This one, they have said this is an act of war. If we support Israel, as the United States tends to do, are we supporting another war? We've been supporting Ukraine. We're now in another situation where we're supporting another attacked party.
Yes, and if we're low on weapons and ammunition, as a lot of experts say we are, because of what we sent over to Ukraine, and now we're going to send weapon stores over to Israel, we're in trouble as far as being able to protect our own homeland.
Yes, and the U.S. has already started sending a carrier strike group to the Eastern Mediterranean in support of Israel. So we are sending a lot of our resources overseas. Right now, Israel, Ukraine, we are seeing a run on the southern border. It is men of fighting age that are coming up through our southern borders. They've already noted, even the White House noted, that ISIS-led groups or people who align themselves with ISIS have been running others up into the United States illegally. How many people, how many tens of thousands of men of fighting age from foreign countries do we need to introduce into the United States?
Yes, and that's the thing, is I would call them OTMs and OTGs that are coming up through the southern border, other than Mexican, other than Guatemalan, and pick a country down there.
Other than, well, we're seeing a lot of Venezuelans or Guatemalans or Mexican, but it pales in comparison to people who are able to get over from non-contiguous areas to Mexico and then come up through our southern border. And that is a big threat.
Yes.
People who are not actually coming up on foot.
Yes, and here we have a large Chinese population coming up through our southern border as well. They're not coming here to open restaurants or become lawyers and doctors. They're coming here for other means, because there's plenty of other places they could go without having to cross an ocean and then come up through thousands of miles of land to make their way here. But let's get back to the Palestinians and Hamas. From what I've gleaned watching multiple news reports, a big majority of the Palestinian people do not want to be led by Hamas. But Hamas has gone into, like, the Gaza Strip through murder, through rape, through downright terrorism. They've scared the living you-know-what out of the Palestinian people, so they're scared to rise up and try to save their own people. And I guarantee you there's a lot of them that don't mind how things go at the border there, because, you know, they have pass-through borders there at the Gaza Strip. There's literally thousands upon thousands of Palestinians that get to go into Israel, work, make a good living, and they go home every night. Israel provides 50% of the power to the Gaza Strip. They also provide thousands upon thousands of metric tons of food to them every year. Well, if, like these geopolitical experts were saying today, that $6 billion that was supposed to be freed up for Iran, and there was a bunch that was given to the Palestinian Authority, and you look at how they live in squalor, well, somebody's either not telling the truth, somebody's stealing the money, or they're just taking care of themselves and they're not taking care of the Palestinian people.
So this is something that I've heard about, not just from or in regards to Palestine. You hear the same thing out of North Korea. all of the aid that gets sent to North Korea goes to the top down. So you can look at people who are living in absolute poverty and know that they're not going to get the food that is being sent over to North Korea. So if you look at Palestine, just 1 year ago, well, a little more than a year ago, July 14th, 2022, the White House put out a fact sheet on the United States-Palestinian relationship. And on July 15th, this fact sheet was talking about what was going to happen the next day. But on July 15th, the president announced a number of initiatives in support of the Palestinian people, improving access to healthcare and technology, rolling out long overdue 4G digital connectivity to both Gaza and the West Bank, bolstering economic growth, providing critical services for Palestinian refugees, reducing food insecurity, fostering people-to-people dialogue to support peace. And we are talking hundreds of millions of dollars being sent by the United States over to Palestine. Many different ways that this was supposed to get dispersed over several different years. And yet we run into a situation where those contributions totaling $316 million supporting the Palestinian people on top of more than $500 million the United States had provided to the Palestinian people since the Biden administration restored needed funding, as they called it. Where did that money go? That money that we sent over to Palestine funded the terrorism that we saw, in addition to the $6 billion that has now been freed up that will additionally fund terrorism. The Iran Authority, they were dancing and singing and praising death to Israel, death to the United States. We funded the attack on Israel.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of those geopolitical experts in D.C. saying, no, not one dime of that money's been spent yet. No, it's not going to go to weapons for Hamas and for Hezbollah. It's only going to go to humanitarian things. Well, not only did our State Department release the $6 billion, they also released Iran's ability to sell oil. And they are selling oil to China to the tune of about $60 billion a year. So even if you have $6 billion in the bank and you're making $60 billion, you can spend whatever you want of that on your nuclear program, on weapons to terrorist organizations. And it's obvious they've been doing it for years. Like some young news reporter said earlier today, this goes through multiple presidencies that we've had this issue. So I often wonder how many different ways they've tried to make peace with the Palestinian people, not with Hamas, not with Hezbollah, with the Palestinian people. And they would go in and say, okay, we want a two-state solution. How about we go with a one-state cohabitation? And we're going to go ahead and take that barrier down between the Gaza Strip and us. But you guys have to bring forward every person in Gaza that is a known terrorist or terrorist sympathizer. And let's see where the rubber really meets the road, if they really want a one or two state solution, or if they just, as you hear a lot of people say in Israel, the death and destruction of Israel and of the Jewish people. I don't know. I'm not a geopolitical expert. I know certain parts of the Bible. I actually tried to look into it a little bit today to see how many times Palestine's mentioned in the Bible. And depending on which Bible you go to, you get a different answer.
That was something that I was looking into too. I know that some of the claims right now is that there is a connection of the Israelis having taken over Palestinian land. So essentially, they are wrongful occupiers of somebody else's land. And some have made the connection to the Europeans that came to the United States and now occupy, well, what wasn't the United States, but indigenous land, and occupy what is now the United States and have taken it from the indigenous population. They make the same connections that when the Jewish people were looking for a place to land, Palestinians gave them a place to land, and then they overthrew the people who essentially gave them a home.
Well, see, and that's been going on for thousands of years with other countries as well. I believe the Ottoman Turk era actually was the rulers over the Palestinians for many, many years. And what I read years ago was that Jordan, if you look at the real map that has been unmolested from Westerners and from English and others, Jordan is actually where the Palestinian land's at. And there is, from what I understand, 1 million or more Palestinians living in Jordan as well.
That is definitely something to look further into. I know with one of the things that I've thought about as far as like having taken over land, if you look at the Bible as a history book, or if you just go look at history books and you toss out the Bible, your choice. Jewish people, the Israelis, claimed that land thousands of years ago, and then they were overthrown and it became their takers' land. And then it passed around Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire. It passed from hand to hand depending on who was trying to take over a certain place. So if you want to go back in history, to whom do you restore the land? And who is considered the taker and who is considered the takee? How far back do you go? Most recent history, what we remember in our brains is the Israeli people took it over in the 1940s and claimed it as their own, and there has been skirmishes since that point to try and take it back or win it back, whichever way you want to look at it. But if we go back in history farther, why did we only go to that point? Why did we only go to the last people that had it? What about the people they took it from? What about the people before that? And I think the same thing inside the United States. You say this is indigenous land. Okay, do we only look back to the very last person who had it right before the Europeans came in? Or do you say, well, you warred against this tribe and it was theirs before you, and then they warred against this tribe and it was theirs? Or the fact that indigenous people were generally agrarian and they would move from plot of land to plot of land depending on if the minerals were being eaten up by their crops. So they would move to a new area to grow their crop better, and they were moving themselves. Do they get it because they farmed there once? Who gets it?
Well, the Spanish do. They're the ones that came in and took over Mexico, correct?
Yes.
And they own parts of the U.S.?
Yes.
Okay.
So how far back do you go? We stole it from the Spanish, warred it, stole it, took it over. Do you go back to the Spanish and say, who did you war it over? Who did you take it from? Who were the indigenous Mexicans? Because they were treated horribly. So let's give it back to Mexico, because technically it should go back to Mexico. Or is it Mexico can't have it because there were certain other indigenous people that lived there and not the indigenous people of Mexico living there? How far back?
Right. Well, where'd the Incans go? Where'd the Mayans go? Nobody knows.
So if it was Mayan, is it extinct and nobody gets it?
It's free for all.
Okay.
The only reason I kind of brought up Spain and Mexico and the U.S. because in the middle of doing all this studying today, a little video popped up on Catalina Island and the Indian tribe that Catalina used to belong to for 6,000 years. How they carbon dated back 6,000 years, I have no idea. But then I believe it was Juan Cabrillo, Spanish explorer, discovered Catalina. I don't know how you discover something that's already there.
Right.
but they took ownership of it for Spain. And then over time, with the change of the guard there, they ran the indigenous people off. So I asked myself that question looking at Catalina today. Should we not try to find the last descendant of those Indians and take that away from LA County and the Wrigley group that owns 90% of the island and give it back to them?
Food for thought.
Absolutely.
In the world of politics, no one has left this Israel-Palestine conflict out of their hands, so to speak. Some are calling for immediate peace. They're not condemning Hamas. They're not condemning what happened. They're just saying it needs to stop. Let's have peace. Some are saying Israel has no right to retaliate, that they should just negotiate with the terrorists and ceasefire. Others are in full support of a war. But our politicians here inside the United States are definitely using it as their next stepping stone.
They'll try to use it for their advantage,
yes.
To their advantage.
So U.S. Senator Cory Booker was in Israel when the attack happened. And he did a posting with regard to how he felt while it was happening, saying that it needed to end, there needed to be a ceasefire. And someone that he knows responded to his posting about how Senate Democrats had made decisions that essentially supported Hamas and supported Palestine, which led to this war that is going on. And a very prominent Jewish individual is the one who's saying that Cory Booker needs to atone for his sins, which is having supported the wrong side.
Can you switch to the right side after the fact? I think one that needs to do a little introspect and look at herself is that Congresswoman Tlaib.
Rashid Tlaib. She is Palestinian. Pretty sure she supports what happened in Palestine.
And she's very anti-Semitic. There's no doubt. Listening to her speak, she is very anti-Semitic. But it's interesting, even our former President Obama came out and condemned the attack. But in the same paragraph says, yeah, we need to try for peace right now between Israel and Hamas. Well, wait a minute. They were kind of at peace. They were working on an accord with Saudi Arabia. They had some really good things happen under the last president, and they were working on some stuff under this president. And Iran and Hamas decided they didn't want that to go forward. So they need to hold this thought on, we need to have peace. What Israel needs to do is what they're doing. Unfortunately, again, like us civilians, they're going to be caught right in the middle of it, because as hard as they're going to try to mitigate or minimize civilian casualties, this is another organization that likes to put young kids and women in harm's way so they can put them on the news and make it look bad. But they need to thump this Hamas group once and for all. They just need to finish it.
Can't keep appeasing. The leader of Israel said they will not negotiate with terrorists. That it is not something that negotiations, or we're past negotiations. They've been negotiating peace treaties and working together for decades. They've been agreeable for a two-party state. They have made concessions throughout the years, and all it has led to is attacks, missile attacks, killing of children, killing of women, killing of the elderly, rape. They're not going to negotiate with these terrorists any longer.
And that is what they are. And I can see, playing devil's advocate, how some on the Palestinian side feel that it's Israel's fault for a lot of this stuff. But there has to be a negotiated settlement sometime in the future, you would think, or they're just going to continue to blast the is bejesus a good word?
The bejesus out of each other.
They're going to blast the bejesus out of each other, and we're just going to be going through this 4 or 5 years from now.
Yes. So in the meantime, they're working to verify reports of how many Americans are dead, how many foreigners are dead, and how many were taken hostage. According to the Bible, if you're a believer, while this may be Israel, one of the prophecies is that if Damascus falls, it is fulfilling a prophecy of the Bible.
It's interesting you say that. Because
Why?
Because one of the Israeli spokesmen for the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, made the statement today that if Hezbollah attacks from Syria, they're going to level the entire country.
So Damascus will be no more.
Damascus will be no more. So, point, make sure your stuff's right.
You need to believe that what you believe is really real.
And it may be all religions, because we believe in Christianity and our way of life. Somebody else may not, no matter how hard you try to bring them to the Lord. They just may not. And hopefully they're right with themselves too. Because if the Almighty decides to come, take out the earth, doesn't matter what your religion is then, does it?
It does not. It's what you believe. If you believe that what you believe is really real.
I know waking up Saturday morning and seeing what was going on in Israel was very sad. Very, very sad.
Absolutely. One of the locations that they struck was the site of a music festival. So you just had a bunch of unarmed civilians at a music festival.
Young men and women.
Young men and women having a good time. And in fact, there was a mom who was pleading for information regarding her daughter. Her daughter is a German citizen as well as an Israeli citizen. And she was unfortunately seen, or fortunately, at least the mom had some visual, but it did not look good. She was seen on the back of a vehicle, unconscious, stripped down to her underwear, and being taken away by Hamas. So if she was alive, she was a kidnapping victim, and if she wasn't, she was a victim of murder. It would seem odd for them to take a dead person when they were killing everyone, so it tends to, for me, to lean towards the side of a kidnapping victim.
Yeah, I believe she was the tattoo artist that was there from Germany.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she made the news. Not that every other person isn't just as important. We had New York police officers going through training over there in Israel that were caught up. There are many people that we don't know the name of that were caught in this.
I guess there's about
attack.
200,000 Americans / Jewish people that have dual citizenship that actually live in Israel. About 200,000 Americans.
And the U.S. government should know how many, based on the fact that only Americans, actually I think there's one other country in the entire world, but Americans are required to file tax returns every year for all foreign related information. So if you have a job, you're required to report on that to the U.S. government, even though you're not living in the United States. And if you're married and your spouse has a job, you're also required to report on them, even if they are not a United States citizen. So the government should have an idea of how many people, based on tax filings, are living in foreign locations.
They do. It just takes them a little bit of time to vet that out and get it going. One thing that was interesting about China's reply to this whole thing today was they need to stop. Israel needs to not get carried away with a retaliatory strike. It's the interesting thing is with the human rights violations of China, they really should not be dictating to another country how to respond to a terrorist attack.
I'm pretty sure that if China got attacked, they wouldn't just say, oh, well. They don't even let their own countrymen speak out. And those are words. You're telling me that if somebody came in and attacked Beijing, they would just say, no worries, it's okay. I'm sure they're good now.
They would probably try to annihilate them all, and I hope this doesn't give them an on-ramp to go after Taiwan now, because we're going to be focused on two different theaters, spending all kinds of money. One thing that is good, though, is we have a couple $2 billion worth of stored weapons in Israel. So there is a lot of stuff that's already there. I only know that because a general let the cat out of the bag on Sunday that we have a couple billion in weapon systems there.
Oh, it's really funny because they're blaming Trump right now for having... The claim is he showed some classified documents to one of his friends, and that harmed another country. So I'm surprised there's not a claim now that it's a Trump fault.
Well, then we could just throw it right back and say, well, when Biden had those classified documents in his garage by his Corvette, that he allowed his son to look at those documents. Because I guarantee if you do fingerprint analysis of a lot of those documents,
you'll find his.
You'll find his and others on them.
What if we swap it for cocaine?
Yes.
In other news.
In other
news. We just have so much that is going on. It's not really other news. Those are really big things. Being at war with Ukraine and Russia, being at war with Israel and Hamas, Palestine.
Hold on one sec.
Go ahead.
Speaking of being at war with Ukraine, there is rumor, scuttlebutt, innuendo that a bunch of the weapon systems we sent to Ukraine have been sold on the black market and made their way to Israel, to Hamas, and a lot of the weapon systems that Biden left behind in Afghanistan.
That we were told repeatedly were unusable and stripped?
Have made their way to Hamas. So we actually have a congresswoman who sometimes I think isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, only because of the way she interacts with people sometimes. And I know somebody that listens to us in Texas is going to disagree with me.
Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Yes. But she made a very good statement yesterday that they're going to dive into these, and if they can find them weapons and find serial numbers, then they're going to try to backtrace them as to how the heck they made it from Ukraine to the battlefield in Israel.
There was already, as you said, rumors, scuttlebutt, innuendo that the weapons that we were sending over there were being sold on the black market, that they were not making it into the hands of the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers. There was already that rumor laid out there. So if the weapons from Ukraine and the weapons from Afghanistan have in fact been spirited away and ended up in the hands of Hamas, the United States, again, funded the attack on Israel, and we have a problem. Money, of course, is a big problem. People are absolutely enamored with some of the things that they can do, and there's even talk that Zelensky's wife, when they were making their rounds with the UN and the United States and pleading for more money and more help, that she went on a $1 million spending spree in New York. Please tell me how a woman in a war-torn country begging other countries for money and help and support has $1 million to spend. And even if you did, is now the time to go buy some jewelry or pretty little things? I don't actually know what she spent the money on. I'll be forthright on that, but the claim is they have receipts that she spent $1 million at least in New York on items unrelated to their situation.
Would not surprise me, because they're the top 1%. They're better than us. Do as I say, not as I do.
But I guess if he's supposedly worth $20 million, they can spend $1 million while at war. They must not be too concerned with their situation if they're just spending money like it's going out of style.
And that's another conflict I guarantee you could have come to a resolution quite a while ago. I believe the military-industrial complex does not want it to end because they're making bank. They're making so much money, it's ridiculous. Isn't it kind of pathetic that you can get the human condition to fight each other over a piece of dirt?
Pretty pathetic.
That's all it is dirt.
And then we go through and say, no, it's my dirt. No, it's also not your dirt. Somebody else, somewhere else is ordering you as their president, or your leader to go kill somebody else over that same plot of land that neither one of you are going to lay any claim to. It is not you holding your ground, saying, this is my farm, this is my livelihood, I will not go. No, you can't have it.
A lot of Ukrainians and Russians are related in one way or another. Just like over here during our Civil War, we had brother on brother. So they're going to realize at the end of this thing how stupid it was. And I'm going to go back to a conspiracy theory that I talked about a long time ago. If you go back to the very first building that was blowed up over there, that's where all the info was hidden on Hunter Biden. That goes back to that prosecutor that was let go. The oil company that he was working with, I'm almost certain that's the very first place to have gotten blown up. Conspiracy.
We'll find out in 50 years when they finally release the information.
Well, you'll have to go to Texas and call me because it's a local call from there. Because 50 years from now, it'll have to be a local call.
Not going to be, you're going to be alive. No.
Hope so.
So something that is close to our heart on this show are military people. I know we have a lot of military people who will now be deploying closer to war, and we pray for you.
100%.
Our leadership in the military, our top generals or admirals if you're in the Navy, Coastie. Do Coasties count?
Coasties count.
Just kidding, Coast Guard. So a new report has come out that says the majority of retired 4-star officers got jobs in defense industry. So they go from one side working for the government and parlay their status into the defense industry.
And they're able to take all that inside knowledge with them.
And go and use it. So 26 of the 32 4-star officers who retired after June 2018 were employed by the arms industry as board members, advisors, executives, consultants, lobbyists, or members of financial institutions that invest in the defense sector.
What did I just say 3 minutes ago about the military-industrial complex?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Coming and going. They get it on both sides. And
they're doing that. You have congressmen and senators who become lobbyists. They make millions or hundreds of thousands. You have former presidents that go out and give speeches, which make no sense when you listen to their speeches. Their spouses go make speeches. They make $100,000 for a 15-minute speech.
It's just a way for them to continue to get paid and get paid better than they ever got paid before. Why is it you doing your job is worth less than you talking about the fact that you did a job?
Because that's the way Washington, D.C. has set up the system. And that's one of the areas, if you want to talk about the removal of the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, if you listen to
Matt Gaetz,
Matt Gaetz, on face value, it sounds legitimate that here we go, like you and I talked the last podcast and the weeks prior to that, is they do this same dog and pony show. We're up against a hard stop. We have to come up with these fixes for our budget. We got to do a continuing resolution. And then within the continuing resolutions, they throw all this pork in there. And that's basically what Matt Gaetz is saying, is that the Speaker of the House was throwing in pork, not telling the truth, making deals with multiple people. See, I don't know. We weren't there, so we don't know what the real truth is. But I would tend to believe, by watching history and what's been going on over the last few years and how now we're at 33 trillion in debt, I would believe that he was doing something like that.
well, these continuing resolutions allow, as you noted, all this pork, all this other stuff, all of the wheeling and dealing and everything on the back end. It allows it to continue and to fester and to grow. And if you look at the the nearly 5 decades that our current system has been in place for budgeting and spending our tax dollars, Congress has only passed the required appropriation measures on time 4 times. 1977, which is the first time that they were required to do it under this system. 1989, 1995, and 1997. We have had non-timely and continuing resolutions every other time since. Every time in between, and from 97 to present.
I think Bill Clinton was one of the only presidents that actually had a budget.
2 times. He got a timely budget with Congress 2 times, 95 and 97. Those were during his terms.
Much as I thought he was a fraud, at least he could put a budget forward that the House Republicans could get passed. And that was Newt Gingrich that worked with him to get those budgets through. So was it Clinton or was it Congress?
It's Congress who passes the budget. The president can say, I would like these things in the budget, and this is how much I would like. And in fact, if you walk that back, in order to get the budget, all of the offices that are out there, Department of Homeland Security, and then you can break it down to how many are under that umbrella, USCIS, CBP, ICE, and everybody, FBI, well, they're not under DHS, they're under DOJ. Anyway, every single office submits their request for a budget. The president can also submit, hey, I would like to see these things. My priorities are these things, these offices, whatever. The people are calling for more X, Y, or Z. So the president puts that in, and then Congress passes their version of a budget. It starts with the House. Technically, all budgets are money items. All budgets are supposed to start in the House. They pass it. It gets sent to the Senate. They either take it as is, or they send it back to the House. They will make a change, and then it goes back to the House, and they have to agree to the change or not. Those two have to have a meeting of the minds, the House and the Senate, and then that gets to the president. It doesn't start at the president. The president can say that they want no money, no budget, and everybody can go pound sand, and a budget can still be passed.
Yes, they all want their pet projects, so every president does.
Every single president, and then you have all of the House and Senate people that put in their pork. Now, I know we've talked about on this show being a one bill, one item. Well, in order for the budget to go through, really it should encompass everything that they want. But our problem is that they put in so much pork and the bill gets so long, it's hard to find out what they're spending the money on. And then it ends up getting passed because they'll do something like introduce it at 1:00 in the morning, tell all whoever's in charge, tell all the Democrats to be there, tell all the Republicans to be there, and they'll get something passed So the other side doesn't have a say on it, whoever's in charge.
Right. You can't read a 20,000 page bill
In an
one
hour.
weekend or in an hour.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that was gleaned out of this last one was $1 million toilet for a congressman or woman.
Other things that we're seeing are people who say, yes, we should help people, our representatives. Let's help fund Israel. But I won't pass any funding for Israel unless it's tied to extra funding for Ukraine, even though we have sent, printed billions of dollars for Ukraine, and now Israel has been attacked. It is essentially their 9/11, and you have Congress people who are saying, only if you do this other thing. It can't be clean. Let's just help out Israel. It's only if you do this other thing. And we saw it with the last continuing resolution. They wanted to put the only if yous inside those budgets.
Well, like you or I or you and I said last week, we just want them to do their job. Look at what you have in the bank, spend accordingly, and then if you don't have it, wait till the next fiscal year when you bring in more tax revenue, and then you work on the next projects.
You don't keep spending yourself into a deficit.
Well, it's either that or we're being misled like everything else. The deficits are BS. If they can just print money at will and there's no real property like there used to be, or real assets or gold, because we used to be on a gold standard, if there's nothing to back up your money, what difference does it make? They're more concerned about a taxpayer that lives in Fresno, California, that owes $500 in taxes than 500 people in D.C. that have gotten us $33 trillion in debt, and they just get to move on and go like it's nothing.
So I've been listening to a book called Atlas Shrugged.
I own that book.
And one of the quotes that struck me today was, money is made before it can be looted or mooched. And another thing that it dove into was that what does the government need/want from you? It wants your tax dollars. What happens when the laws that they have made don't net enough money? They create more ways to take that money from you, not just through taxes, but also through penalties. And I felt like there was a good nexus between this book and what is happening. So as you just said, what happens if a person in Fresno doesn't pay their $500 fine, or the IRS says, not only did you underpay, whether accidentally or on purpose, you now owe extra money for your accidentally or your on purpose mistake. And so what does that do? That nets them even more money. What happens if they owe you and it's not caught nothing? They're not going to cut you a check. You have to tell them you owe me.
Nothing, and it falls on deaf ears.
And it does. And when you look into it, if there's not enough things for the government to get money, they create new ways of getting money. For instance, California just passed a law that says that big business, and then they define big business as a company of such a size making such an amount of money a year, has to report what their carbon emissions are. And it's not just what your carbon emissions are. There's like secondary carbon emissions and other carbon emissions and things in the background and this nice complicated piece of law. But that information is already very difficult to discern for the person with the PhD who does that for a living. Now they want companies who make shoes, who make clothes, who make tires for cars, who make cars. Whatever you're doing inside of California, they are now requiring that you pay somebody to monitor your whole entire company for every single thing that you do and tell the government and publish it what your carbon emissions are. And if you don't, they'll force you to pay them money.
See, and a lot of these companies operate on very slim margins. So like you said, it's just another way to take money. And before you know it, they're going to have you analyzing all your employees' methane gas that comes out of their tailpipes while they're at work. And you're going to have to report that as well. Because then they can go back and dive into that person's diet to see what they're eating and see if there's anything we can do to mitigate some of that methane.
Yeah, and something that that was good. Something that the local government's doing here, we purchased a house. It already had the house, the patio, the shop. It already had that. So we said we wanted to do our good government work. We were told California has praised, PG&E has requested, go solar. Okay. Can we please have permits and permission to put solar on our shop? Please, good government, let me send you some money for that permission. And they came back and said, oh, you have an ag building. It was ag exempt. It wasn't made under current laws, but it was made under prior laws. So should you choose to do that and put the solar on your shop, we're going to have to come out and inspect it. And you have to pay us to inspect it. And if we find anything that is out of line with today's standards, you're also going to have to pay a fine for that. Oh, and by the way, if you want us to come and inspect the solar, which they're required to come out and do per the law, and we're required to pay them to come out and do, we're also going to check your entire property for everything that has ever existed on that property and make sure it's compliant by today's standards. I'm sorry. You had no issue with this building giving an ag permit all those years ago, but now I have to make it up to date by your standards? Because why? I already had a structural engineer come out just to make sure that it was good to go. I didn't want to make that mistake and put it on something that couldn't hold it. Structural engineer said it is structurally sound. And it's the same structural engineer that the city signs off on stuff all the time. Still not good enough. Someone else working for the city is going to come out and then they're going to check my chicken coop. Then they're going to check to make sure I have smoke alarms in every room of my house, even though I'm only asking them, can I put this solar on the outside of my shop with a permit, with electrical permit, with PG&E coming out, all of the wires being good to go. But it's not enough for them.
Nope.
However, if you give them money, might be good enough for them.
Yeah, well, you're trying to decrease your carbon footprint on the world.
Yep.
And you're following what they've asked you to do, and now they want more. And the ridiculous thing is, not only are they going to check your chicken coop, I think they're going to look at your girls' playhouse too, right? To make sure it isn't too big.
Yes.
Because I don't know who in their infinite wisdom came up with those dimensions, but you can build no shed or nothing larger than, I believe it's 150 square feet without pulling a permit.
But if you're too tall, they might decide that you're an exception. Now, what's really interesting is our land is even designated agriculture land based on Fresno County's own designation. But they are getting the best of both worlds. They are treating it like ag land while simultaneously considering it residential.
Dual purpose taxes.
Yes.
See, that's how the tax man worketh. Like you said, that's how they generate extra fees. The interesting thing is when I did my solar, it was right in the middle of COVID. So I didn't have a single inspector here until the final sign off. And he climbed on my roof, was up there for 1 minute, climbed down and signed my stuff off.
Well, at least he earned his pay, I guess. But you have we have the luxury of paying them to not do anything.
Well, yes, and that stuff is not inexpensive by any means. My small system was somewhere between $600 and $800.
Yep. And if we want to make our shop compliant by today's standards, we have to pay hundreds of dollars to do so. And what will make it compliant? Them walking on our property, looking at it and saying, yep.
Yeah, it looks good. Let's go ahead and sign this paper.
Yes. Paying a fee for no benefit.
Yes, and unfortunately, because of the current crop of super intellects we have in D.C. who have wrecked our economy, who have opened our border, who have every price up 25% or more, if you wanted to sell right now and get out of the state, you lose money.
Yeah, we would be in a money-losing situation. It would definitely not be beneficial for us at this time. What is beneficial is being next to our family and friends. And I am thankful for my family, and I'm thankful to be here in some regard. But what is going on with our government and their permissions that they are giving us to exist is ridiculous.
That's why I heard somebody make a statement about 4 days ago that we as Americans own nothing. It's all loaned to us. And by that I mean you spend all this money buying a piece of property. What do you do the entire life of you owning the property? Annually, pay property taxes.
Missing a dollar payment?
Try to not make the property tax payment and see what happens. Even if it's $100, $500, $1,000, over time, they will come seize your property.
Yeah, and they just had a case that went up to the Supreme Court about just how much money that they can take once they turn around and sell your land too, and not have to pay you for the difference between what the property was worth and how much taxes you owed.
Well, there's definitely a criminal element to all this, and I really thank all the lawyers and the accountants that came up with all these schemes, because I'm sure you're sitting at home with your big fat check enjoying yourself while other people live in squalor and misery.
Yeah, I'm not sitting at home trying to figure out how I'm going to make my dollar stretch further, I'm going to reduce my gas bill to get into town to buy the groceries, working at limiting which groceries I even buy because of how much money it is costing to buy each of those things, how much of it I can grow myself, although the cost of buying plants has even gone up, the cost of buying soil has gone up. So if you're trying to plant your own garden, it's not going to be wholly cost effective. And buying from the store, I try to maintain my grocery budget, but it's definitely been blown by these astronomical prices that we have seen in the last 1 to 2 years.
It's ridiculous. I don't know how some of the lower income people can afford to eat. I don't know what they're sacrificing, if they're giving up their cars, if they're riding a bus, if they're walking to work, riding a bicycle. But when everything goes up 15 to 30%, these poor folks on the lower end of the spectrum cannot afford this.
What do you do?
Well, you hopefully are able to weather until the next.
Hopefully things get better. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
you're
next
able to
group
keep
takes
going
over.
until you can.
Yeah. But it's a vicious cycle, because we're limited to 4 and 8 years. So you have one guy or gal that comes in for 4 years, makes some really good monetary decisions, and the economy just roars. Then you have the next one that comes in, and their policies are theory that doesn't work, and then they wreck the economy, and we have to wait for the next cycle to repeat itself.
And you have some living in complete denial. I will say Biden is either in complete denial or he's in complete senile. He boasts Bidenomics and everything that it's doing for the country. I don't think he's had to personally buy any groceries in years. Does he even know what the grocery store looks like? But he's telling people that the country is better than ever and Bidenomics is really working and prices are down. So I just think he lives in happy land because he's so senile. But the approval for Biden's economic policies has tanked to the lowest level of his presidency. And people are really seeing it. But how much of a difference is it making just because you can see that things are worse for you? Are you willing to change who you support? Is Bidenomics so bad that you'll drop the vote blue no matter who? Vote I until I die?
Well, I didn't know that he was an economist or a monetary expert. I thought he was just a guy that knows how to get his drug-addicted son to extort money out of companies so they have a nice paycheck when they all retire. Bidenomics doesn't work. Leaving your southern border wide open so 4 to 6 million in 3 years can flood up your southern pipe. Everything about this man has been kind of fraudulent from day one. And I don't mean day one of his presidency. I mean the very first time, most likely, he ran for Senate and he plagiarized speeches.
He's been a plagiarizer for many years. You know who else is a plagiarizer? Or a taker of certain words and then sending it through the thesaurus to make it sound like it's not you, but it's you? Vivek Ramaswamy. He, if you compare his speeches to Obama, he does a lot of Obama-like speeches. Even Hunter Biden accused Obama of taking Biden speeches, Biden information. And I understand some of the info is just going to be out there for all to use. It is not new. And some of our experiences are going to be remarkably similar to others. So if I say I grew up in the Central Valley and I'm the granddaughter of farmers, somebody else can have that exact same speech. I grew up in the Central Valley and I'm the granddaughter of farmers. Okay, so that's basic. But then you start to see I'm the guy with the weird name. But then you just start to see patterns. Now I know that they compared Trump's speeches to other speeches. Are all of our words just so similar and our speech patterns so similar that nobody's really cribbing from another? Unless, of course, it is not your actual life, which was the case of Biden using experiences that aren't his actual life experience.
What? He was never a truck driver?
Never a truck driver.
He's never a pilot?
His son did not die in Iraq. I can't remember. Was it an Irish or a British individual that he took one of his speeches from when he was running?
It was an Irish.
So he didn't live the Irish lifestyle in, overseas in Europe.
Well, see, at least now you can use AI and you can just tell the AI, hey, combine Obamas and Clintons and Bidens and Bushes and Trump's speeches all together and kick me out one super good speech. So then they can accuse you of plagiarizing 6 different people.
Go big or go home.
Absolutely. Then you can use plausible deniability and say, no, AI wrote it for me.
I just got a little bit of help from AI. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Apparently he's switching parties.
He's going to go independent?
He is going to go independent. Why would
he go independent?
My thought is he runs for under the Democrat ticket. The Democrats, hands down, are going to nominate Biden. It doesn't matter how well he does. Stands no chance. So he switches to independent. He can actually pull votes away from Biden, even if he gets nowhere.
So the DNC was going to Bernie him.
Yes. He was going to be a Bernie. Biden won't do any...
No debates?
No debates. He won't do any debates. He won't do anything. He's not running. It is an auto nomination.
Well, that's the way it's supposed to be, but when you look at his age, you look at his cognitive reasoning, you look at all the variables, he shouldn't be running. And shame on these handlers for running him, and shame on his wife.
Yeah, he's too busy to really talk about what's happening in Israel. He's hosting a barbecue. If you look at his schedule is somewhere usually between 10 and 2, sometimes as late as 4. He hardly has anything on his official public schedule. Now, I understand that you can do stuff behind the scenes. They give him weekends off, evenings off. He doesn't come in that early in the morning. His handlers are really running the show, and whoever is actually behind the scenes, the one pulling the strings, making all the speeches are made to be tailored to whoever is really running the show. It is what they want Biden to say.
Yes, and I believe that they're using some type of drugs on him, because you can tell when he goes out to give a speech, right when the speech and his cognitive reasoning starts to fall off is generally when they're done and handlers run out there, whether it's the little rabbit at Easter or one of his other handlers, they get him off the stage.
And he does the iRobot vacuum, where he goes back and forth on the stage trying to figure out which direction he needs to go because he can't even get off a stage.
Correct.
Cannot get off a stage. You can go, you're the president, you can go whatever direction you want to go. You want to go left, you want to go right, you want to go over the front, you want to jump off, you want to go sit down, you want to go behind the curtain, whatever you want to do. They're not going to tell you no, unless you're literally not allowed to do anything without permission. But the guy cannot find his way off a stage. He is not running any show.
He is not.
Who do you predict will win 2024?
President?
Yes.
Donald Trump.
Some of the top pollsters are also predicting the same. If it's a Trump-Biden contest, they predict that Trump will win by a landslide. Now, with all of his lawsuits that are going on right now and indictments that are going on right now, if he is found guilty criminally, but the people still vote for him for president and he is the nominee, do you think the Electoral College will undo that decision?
Nope. I think they would have quite a bit of mayhem on their hands. America can see what they're doing to this man. They can see how they're trying to railroad him. He has done nothing different than anyone else has. Stacey Abrams, Hillary Clinton, and others, Maxine Waters, that stood up in the halls of Congress and didn't want the election certified. And they talked and did the exact same things that he did. And it's a First Amendment right, free speech. He has a right to say that. They know it. If these prosecutors and these DAs were legitimate, they would not have even taken these cases. Just like the one that you and I talked about with Mar-a-Lago. That's a fraudulent case too. That case should never have been brought. 80% of it's been thrown out because the statute of limitations has run out. You can't have a judge who has no background experience in real estate, in estimating.
Estimating Mar-a-Lago, but they're doing it through New York. Yeah, the New York judge.
Yes, you cannot allow somebody to do that. It's fraud. It's fraud at the highest order.
And in that case, because the one in New York right now, because it's technically civil, he has no right to a jury trial. It is a judge. It is a judge who has wholly given to Democrat causes 100% of the time. It's a judge who has admonished Trump's attorneys for the way they want to present a case. And so when asking questions of witnesses, the judge basically at one point said he didn't care and to quit asking those questions. So what does that say? He's already made up his mind.
He has a predetermined guilty verdict already.
Yes. And so my thought is, if you don't like the way I'm presenting a case, but there's nothing unlawful about it, do you have the right to stop me? I guess you're the judge. It's your courtroom. But if there is nothing unlawful about it, I don't care if it bores you. I don't care if I'm the worst presenter in the world. Maybe I have a stutter and you don't like it. Maybe I clear my throat every 5 seconds and it irritates you. You don't like my word choices. Do you have the right to stop the presentation of a case because you don't like the manner in which it's being presented?
No, you shouldn't. And that should be brought up to the bar there in New York. And when you have I don't know if she's a prosecutor or she's the elected DA, the one that actually ran on getting Trump at
Elected.
all costs.
Elected.
Okay, well, she's another one that should be disbarred, thrown back out of office. Here's a guy that's created in New York, Florida, and other places thousands of jobs. Thousands. The piece of property in question, all of the loans were paid back 100%.
Oh, but the interest rate should have been higher. That's not right.
There was no complainants at all. Zero.
It's the government complaining about private business. But also this elected official who has made it her mission to get Trump, and she ran on that platform. When she was running for office, she repeatedly called him an illegitimate president and not her president. But the fact that she called him an illegitimate president means that he wasn't a duly elected president. And as such, she should be investigated and prosecuted for being an election denier as a government official, barring the fact that we have a First Amendment right. But
absolutely,
all things being equal.
Agreed.
So they're looking to drop one of the charges against Hunter Biden already. One of his defense lawyers has requests to withdraw from the case. I don't know if that's because they're only a negotiating lawyer where they negotiate deals, but if it goes to trial, they're not a trial lawyer. Sometimes that happens. But prosecutors are moving to drop one of the charges against Hunter Biden, so how nice for him. They've had this case for how long? They've known what evidence they have and what to charge, and yet here we are dropping another potential charge for him.
Special treatment and a silver spoon in his mouth.
And some white coke up his nose.
Yep.
I think he actually liked crack cocaine, but maybe he does coke now too.
Well, and that's why he shaved his head before he went into trial, or before he went to the courthouse.
So it can't do a follicle test?
Can't do a follicle test, absolutely.
Should keep it bald. So something with regard to Trump, kind of taking it back to Trump, there is a Washington Post columnist and an associate editor named Ruth Marcus who did write that she was worried that former President Trump was getting harsher treatment than anyone else in New York with the fraud case against him. So something that we've just brought up and talked about is the case against him and whether or not, if everybody does it, regardless of, in this part, it's regardless of if it's illegal or not, if everybody does it, but you only prosecute certain people, you're saying that the law only matters in certain circumstances.
Yes, and that's why I think it's illegitimate, because they're using a law there in New York, which is a Consumer Protection Act, yet not one consumer has been harmed. Not one.
Or filed a complaint.
Zero.
Because then that goes who has standing. So can the government always have the standing? But if there is no one to allege a complaint.
If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, can you hear it?
Well, I can't hear it.
I couldn't hear it either. Someone give us a reply on the biblical aspect of Israel and Palestine, if you have something to add to the story.
This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor Duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.